Thank you, Wallace. My name is Dave Rickard. I'm an alcoholic. I want to first take a minute to thank Wallace. I'm going to get really emotional here. I was thinking about this on the way over. 20 years ago in 8 months, I was getting ready to go out probably on my what appears to be, and I sure hope was my last drunk. And when I ended up in a hospital thinking that my life was over, I was done. I was not done drinking, I was done. And a guy brought me a cassette tape in of Tom I. And it changed my life. And man, I just that is really when I met Wallace in the winter and he asked me to come, I thought, what an amazing circle, what an amazing experience to go from that day to this day. And I can tell you, all I've done is what's been suggested to me in AA. Everything else sort of fell into place. I had very little to do with the rest of it. So I guess I got to talk a little bit how I got there. Travis, thank you for coming with me too. It really meant a lot. We got to listen to a talk of Tom on the way over, and it was a nice drive. And I'm glad to be here. Grateful to be sober. As Wallace said, I came here from Ohio. I actually came from Pittsburgh. I was born in Pittsburgh, a little steel mill part of Pittsburgh, and I had a great childhood. I had everything a kid should want. I had loving parents. I had loving grandparents, aunts, uncles, family, neighbors. I had everything. Everything I wanted, actually. My parents did the best they could, and they not only had difficulty with me, the schools had difficulty with me, later the police had difficulty with me, psychiatrists had difficulty with me, psychologists, our ministers, everybody that seemed to come in contact with me had difficulty with me. And that started for me a lot way before I started drinking. Part of the reason I never thought about coming to an AA meeting was I thought I thought your solution was to talk each other out of drinking every day. And I thought that was kind of pathetic. I didn't want any part of that. I didn't even know if I wanted to stop drinking when I ended up in the hospital. I just knew I couldn't live the way I was living anymore. Because if somebody would have said, man, if you take these 12 steps, you never have to drink again, I would have. That's not a real carrot for me. That didn't interest me. If you told me, like it says in the 12 and 12, if I practiced this as a way of life, the obsession to drink would be expelled and I could live happily and usefully whole, I might buy that. I didn't believe it. And what I had to do first was I had to hear it from you guys. So I started off in this Pittsburgh town. I mean, for me, about second grade, what I recall was, and I don't know if this is abnormal or not, I know for me it was painful. I became painfully self-conscious, painfully aware that I didn't seem to feel the way other people looked. And it was uncomfortable. And I was supposed to be a smart kid. I was reading at a very early age. And I remember they used to parade me around the schools to read to the older kids. And I was, and that really hit me a lot later. I started stealing probably in second grade, as far as I remember. And I never thought of it as stealing. My dad worked for the telephone company, very blue collar, brothers and sisters. I was taught very clearly what was right and wrong. But somehow I had this ability and I still have it, when I want something, I'll make it sort of seem right. And what I thought was, all my friends get allowances, I don't get an allowance. So that money in my dad's old spice box in the top drawer is really my allowance. And I would take it. And pretty soon it became dollars, $20, credit cards, his coin collection, my grandfather's coin collection. And all I would do with it is like buy my friends candy. Or I would take them to the local amusement park. And it was crazy. I did really poorly in school. Elementary school was tough for me because I probably, if I went back to school today, they would have diagnosed me with attention deficit disorder, some kind of depression, some kind of anxiety disorder, and probably a personality disorder. Otherwise, I was okay. And I didn't know what to do with it. If I would have gone to my dad and said, Dad, can I have $1 to go get some go to the amusement park? He'd have said, sure. But I don't know why I did it. And I lied, and this self-consciousness, I didn't know what it was, and I would have never gone to I never went to anybody and said, I'm having difficulties, would you help me? I don't think from second grade until I got sober at 35, I ever asked another human being for help or ever intimated in any way that I might have a problem with anything. I sort of just went about life the way I don't even know where I picked it up. I just developed all these crazy ways of living. By sixth grade, I was really depressed. I was staying home a lot from school, and I was getting in more trouble. And somewhere between sixth and seventh grade, I found booze. And it was amazing to me. It was, what I remember was that all that stuff inside of me, all that racing in my mind, that self-consciousness, that anxiety, that not fitting in, it vanished for me. And I don't know if anybody else experienced that, but it vanished. And I remember in seventh grade, I could go back to my junior high school right now, and I could draw, I'll bet, a 3-foot circle exactly where I was standing when I found myself on a dance floor with Janino Bruba and Claudia Piazza-Huber in 9th grade. I couldn't even have walked into that dance had I not been drinking. And now I'm on the dance floor with 2 9th grade girls. That's amazing. Now about a half hour later, they probably found me under the bleachers, wetting myself and vomiting, and they had to carry me home. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. That moment I had was magical, and it happened a lot when I was younger. I loved drinking. Man, I didn't drink every day in 7th grade, but I drank most days before school, during school, after school. And back then things were different. Teachers, I remember my 8th grade or 7th grade teacher, Miss Kasich, we would go to school in the morning. Across the street was a stop and go, like a 7-Eleven or a Speedway. We'd go over there, we'd go behind it, we'd drink and do some other things, we'd come back in. If the old guy Russ was working, it said 3 students at a time. If he was working, he couldn't handle us. We would rush the store, get our gym bags, fill our gym bags up with candy. Some guys would go cigarettes, but I'd get candy and go across the street and sell it at school. And our teachers were watching us. And Mrs. Kasich, my home group teacher, she used to say, "Man, Rickard, I can't even see your eyes this morning. You must have been behind stop and go this morning." And I would just look up and I'd say, yeah. No trouble because of it. But I did it all the time. And I remember 8th grade, my sister's graduation party. My aunt and my grandmother lived next to each other, and it was my sister and my cousin's graduation party. And the adults were at one house, the high school kids were at another house. And I remember saying, what I remember was, I went to one guy, Bob, and I said, he had a Miller High Life, and I said, can I have a sip? And I asked somebody else that had a short rocks glass, can I have a sip? And the next thing I knew, I'm coming to, it's the next day, and I'm on my grandmother's glider in the backyard. And what they told me, I had vomited in her house, I had wet myself on wet her bed, I had said things to a lot of people there that I shouldn't have said. And I don't remember any of it. And I remember what I couldn't wait was to get to school to tell my friends about what a great time it was. I remember nothing of it. I had vomit on my earth shoe. I don't know if anybody remembers earth shoes. And I couldn't wait to tell my friends what that was about. I thought that was like a really great sign that I had vomited on my earth shoe. None of them... What also happened for me was when I had that moment, when I had that magical feeling, I was never able to keep it from the beginning. I didn't know why. People always suggested to me I stop drinking or just drink like they drank, and I didn't know why. I was always the kid found out in the weeds the next day. I wet the bed. I never thought about, and honestly, even when I got into detox, I never thought about drinking. What I thought about was how can I get that right combination to get that magic moment without the bad things. In 8th grade, my mother took me to a urologist because I was wetting the bed. And I never told her. We never made the, I guess she made, I didn't even think she made the connection. I only wet the bed when I drank. And what I remember, and I remember this distinctly because I wet the bed late as a child, I remember thinking, if they take me to this doctor, maybe they can give me a pill so I won't wet the bed. But I never thought about not drinking. High school was a disaster. I mean, and what happened to me, that self-consciousness when I wasn't drinking became worse. When I was not, and I didn't have alcohol, I mean, it got really, really hard. I was a really talented athlete when I was a kid. I quit playing baseball after 12 because by then, in baseball, you make a mistake, it's you. You can't blame it on anybody. You're right out in the open. And I was so self-conscious. I used to smoke pot before I would play Little League baseball because I thought it would help me relax because I was too self-conscious. I quit playing basketball after 9th grade, and I played football in high school, but by the time I was in high school, I couldn't even show up for practice anymore. I couldn't show up. I would miss, I missed most of my years. I missed a third of the days of the year in school, and I barely graduated. And I thought I would go to college. The night I graduated high school, my parents were going away to a bowling banquet. They would go on a weekend every year, and Friday night they came to the ceremony, and they were going to come back Sunday. And Friday night I went to some graduation parties, and we were coming home, and my ex-girlfriend was in the car, and she was mad because I kissed somebody goodnight or something, and one of my friends has passed out in the back seat. And as she started getting more angry and hollering, I started going faster. That's why I'll show her. And then pretty soon everything just kind of went kind of crazy, and we went off the road, and went about over a hill. We went up about 250 feet into the side of a house. And we were about 100 yards from the police station, and the police came, and I remember there's smoke everywhere, and she and him ran, and I remember, and I didn't know what was going on. I was 17 years old, and I made up some story about being run off the road. And on Sunday, my parents were coming home from the bowling banquet. The car was in the shop, and I left my dad a note. This is how thoughtful I am. And I left my dad a note on the organ right by the door, and it said, "Dad, I wrecked the car. The tire's flat, the windshield's cracked, and you're supposed to call the police." And I thought that was an appropriate way. Now, my dad's never had a parking ticket. My dad's very careful about things, and they didn't know what to do with me. And so they came out to this little amusement park I was working at, and he said, "Can you get a break?" And we went and sat down, and he said, I called the police. The car's totaled. And they said, "Thank God you're okay, and that we're going to have to pay for the house." And I thought, I must have hit the house. And I still don't know that. I mean, I hit the house because there's a hole in the side of the house, but I don't remember hitting the house, and I didn't know it. And I got 3 points for reckless driving for that. I was 17 years old. That was the consequence I got for it. So I had a lot of grandiose fantasies. I used to tell myself I could get straight A's if I want to. But I couldn't. I didn't find out that I couldn't until a long time later. And I thought I'd go to college. I ended up, I didn't get accepted at college. I went like 2 weeks before classes started. I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and I told them I'd like to walk on the football team. This was the year Dan Marino was a sophomore. They were like second in the nation. And I remember the guy looked at me like, he said, "I can't accept you." And I was shocked. I've always waited. I always had this idea that somebody was going to realize how special I am. And I wasn't going to have to work for anything. They were just going to hand me a lot of stuff. And I was like insulted that he wouldn't accept me to the University of Pittsburgh. He said, "I would suggest you go to a community college somewhere and see if you can do college work." And I went to a community college, and I found out I couldn't do college. I barely made it through there. I barely made it. But as a kid, I wanted to be a doctor, so I started off in pre-med biology at a community college. And then I went to visit some friends who were away at college, and they were in a little state school, and I loved it. We went to fraternity parties, and I just went there. So I went to that school. That's how I decided to go. It was a good night of partying, so we went. And I went from pre-med biology to psychology, and then I failed out. And I didn't know what to do. I couldn't hold jobs. I could get jobs. Man, we were talking about that little. I could get jobs. I interview very well. But then they want me to show up. And And they want me to work, and they want me to stay the whole day, and I just can't. I don't have it in me, you know. So I ended up graduating from the University of Pittsburgh in psychology. It took me a long time, and I barely made it. But I got a job, and I was working, and then back then you could get school loans really easily. And so my geographic cures were to go back to school. When the heat would get up, and you know, if I'm running out of money, I'll just get some more loans and go back to school. And I ended up getting into graduate school. I went to Ohio University. I ended up in graduate school in a clinical psychology program. And man, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. It was good. And then about 4 classes before I finished, 6 years, 4 classes before I finished, I showed up one day, and the guy at the internship I was working at said, "Hey, Dave, I just wanted to talk to you before you clean out your office." And I said, "What do you mean clean out my office?" And he said, "Man, they didn't tell you, did they?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You've been dismissed from the program." So now I'm really stuck. I'm just building up loans. I had, when I got sober, I had about $110,000 in school loans, all defaulted. They were garnishing my wages. I wasn't making that kind of money. And I was working in a restaurant, bar. I was tending bar on the weekends and drinking, and things were getting worse. I picked up a couple DUIs on the way. And when I got kicked out of the school, a guy who was the former director of that program called me. And he said, "Dave, I know this is really difficult for you, but I think there's a job available that you might be good for." And it was a half-time job at a local prison. And it was in the mental health department, and it wasn't a great job, but they paid me pretty well for it. When I interviewed for it, they made it a full-time job. So I started working in this prison. And I worked in this prison. I was pretty sure that my boss had dementia. She was kind of old, and I would show up not like 2 minutes late, like an hour and a half late. And this is the state of Ohio, so you're punching in, and there's a whole hierarchy. If you're late, one time you're late, oral reprimand. Second time, written reprimand. Third day, you're home 3 to 5 days without pay. And I was late every day. I had no sick days left because I would get so sick, and I couldn't go to work in the morning. So I'd wake up at like 10 o'clock in the morning and realize I just slept through my alarm. I'd call, I'd make some excuses. I'd go to the hospital. And you know, there's a lot of like opiate kind of stuff right now. They go and get these doctor shopping. I would go emergency department shopping, throw away the prescriptions and keep the doctor's excuse. I went there, and then I realized I never had my insurance cards with me, so I started going to different emergency departments to get doctor's excuses because I thought they were going to see through it or something. So that's another thing. When I got sober, I had hospital bills from about 15 different hospitals from doing that stuff. Now, if I'd have just had my insurance card in my pocket, I'd have paid for it. But I couldn't put things together like that to plan things, organize things. I couldn't do it. In the prison, there was a guy. They called him Shorty. His name was Mike. He's dead now. And Shorty, I mean, if you've ever been in prison, there's a lot of jailhouse religion. There's a lot of jailhouse, and even in the AA community, there's a lot of preaching, and there's a lot of talking about AA and AA. Shorty was the only guy, I worked there for 10 years to the day, he was the only man I've ever seen who took those 12 steps in the prison. He got a sponsor through the mail, and the guy would come into the visiting room. And Shorty would come into my office and tell me about AA. And he would tell me, and he was like happy, and he was excited. He was serving a 40-year tail. He had a 40-year tail still. And he was happier than I was. And I remember thinking, yeah, but you don't have to go home and live my life. and I don't know what that life was. When I look back on it, I had an apartment, I had a job. I don't know what it was. But one day I went to my boss. Her name was Dr. Michael, and I was getting that. I was starting to get that. I would have never used the words, but I was getting restless, irritable, and discontented again. And I thought, I'm going to go back to school. So I remember coming into the place where the meeting room where she was, and I said, like this arrogant, I said, I think I'm going to go back to school. And she just said, matter of fact, you can't. And I was shocked, and I said, what do you mean? And she said, I don't know. She said, but you don't show up for work. When you do, you're late, and you're not getting your work done. She said, something's wrong. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. Because that's not how I thought she saw me. I thought she saw me as this kind of cool, intellectual guy who might party a little too hard, but he really gets along well with the inmates. And I'm sure he can help them, She said, you can't. And she said, I'm going to recommend, I'm not going to force you, but I'm going to recommend you go see somebody. And when I walked away, as I was walking away, she said, lately I see you as a problem child. And I remember, that was about 3 months before I got sober. I could not believe it. I couldn't believe, that's not what I thought she thought. So, that last year of drinking, particularly for me, what happened in that last year for me was that I couldn't get that comfort anymore. I might get very fleeting moments of it, but I would drink, and before I knew it, I was either waking up the next morning or 2 days later in jail, or I remember sometimes standing at the bar so drunk that I couldn't stand up, but my mind still racing and still not being comfortable. And I didn't know what to do, so I would just drink harder. I would drink harder and drink harder. When on August 25th, I went out, and the people say, remember your last drunk? My last drunk was really not even it wasn't that dramatic. I went to the bar. I went after the after bar, and we used to stay after the bar closed, and I was driving home, and let me just go back, because about 2 weeks before that, I was at my grandmother's cottage up in northern Pennsylvania, and I wasn't going to drink one night. I was pretty sick, and I remember thinking, I'm not going to drink because I want to go fishing with some people in the morning. And then my mind turned on me again, and I thought, well, it's a Steelers preseason game. I think I'll just go up to the Sherwood, but I won't drink. I'll just get a sandwich. And then I had to have a Rolling Rock for the Steelers game, and then I came to the next day, and actually I went to an after-hours club that night. It was called the Hunting and Fishing Club, and I almost got into a physical fight with a woman. And I remember there were about 6 or 8 guys with her that weren't happy about that, and they got around me. And then a cop grabbed me and threw me out the door and said, get out of here. And I got in my car, and I started driving around the lake back home, and I started just I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And I said, somebody's got to stop this. And I remember thinking, if I get a good pole, I'm going to slam into a pole and, end it there. I had 3 nephews, and for some reason, I was able to tell myself that my parents would get over my suicide. I even thought I'd be thoughtful about it, because I'm always thoughtful. I was going to wear a suit and lie in my couch like this and overdose on something, so I thought my mother, at least if she came and identified the body, it would be thoughtful. But I couldn't get over the thought of my nephews not having me. That was going to be tough, so I couldn't do it. And so nothing happened that night. But that Tuesday night, I was coming home from the Cat's Eye, and I, about 100 feet from my house, the lights came on, the blue lights came on, and the cop pulled up, and he walked out of my car, and he said, I guess he said, license register. And I remember I said, officer, I'm drunk. You don't have to give me the field sobriety test. Take me in. And he took me into jail and gave me a breathalyzer and all that stuff, and they kept me in jail. And in the morning, I went to the judge, and I said to the judge, he said, how do you plead? I said, Your Honor, if you get me locked up forever, I'll plead guilty. And he looked at me, and he said, Mr. Rickard, this is my 3rd DUI. And he said, Mr. Rickard, these are very serious charges. I recommend you get an attorney and plead no contest. But I had no fight. I pled no contest, and I walked out, and it was pouring down rain. And I found myself on a payphone on the side of a building, and a lady answers the phone, and I said, I got to talk to somebody right now. I can't stop drinking. And she said, oh, it sounds like you're having trouble with alcohol. And on any other day of my life, I'd have said some smart aleck comment and slammed the phone down. But all I said was, yeah. And she said, can you come in at 3 o'clock this afternoon? I said, no way. because I'll be drunk in 5 minutes and I won't know how it happens. And when I look back on that, that was the truth about my drinking for probably 15 years, that I was going to be drunk no matter what. I had no control over whether I drank. And I took a cab down and I sat in this, and she was asking me things like, do you think you need detox? I don't know. I remember nights I tried to go without drinking, and 2 nights sometimes, and I got very sick. And they took me to this hospital in Marietta, Ohio, and put me through medical detox. And I remember feeling that I was just relieved. I had no thoughts of sobriety. I had no thoughts of living outside of it. I really thought I was going to live the rest of my life in an institution. And I was okay with it. I remember one of the nurses in there, her name was Shawn, and she said, let me tell you what we're going to do for you. And she said, we're going to give you a safe place to detox. We're going to give you some very basic information about your condition. And we're going to introduce you to some members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's where you're going to recover if you decide to do that. And I remember thinking, Alcoholics Anonymous is not going to work for me. Because my problem is not alcohol. My problem is what's left when I'm done drinking, when I stop drinking. And I had gone to psychiatrists, counselors, therapy. I've tried every self-help book, I've tried multiple religious organizations to try to deal with what that was, and I didn't know. The only thing that ever seemed to work was booze. And it didn't work anymore. And these AA guys started coming, and a guy named Ick, he was 7 years sober at the time, real local guy, country guy, and he brought me that tape of Tom I. And I remember hearing it, and I remember hearing him talk with this sense of integrity and honesty and kindness that I always thought maybe I would want to be, but I couldn't do it. And we were talking a little way over. The guy's 20 years sober. My mind could not wrap around it because I automatically thought there's no way anybody 20 years sober could as sick as me could stay sober 20 years sober. But a guy named Matt, 10 months sober, used to come in and talk to me. And I don't even know how this happened. That guy, Ick, he was 7 years sober. One night at a meeting, I said to him, would you be my temporary sponsor? I don't know. I must have heard that somewhere. I don't even know what it meant. And he said, yeah. And he used to take me out to meetings. And one night he called me and he said, Dave, he said, I was still in the hospital. He said, we're talking about step 2 at my meeting tonight. Would you like me to come get you? And I said, sure. The only reason I wanted to go out because I loved being with him. I could still smell his English leather and cigarette smoke in that truck. And I loved getting in. It was just like, man, it was just so cool. I loved it going out. And he'd take me for ice cream. And he said, I know you're struggling with step 2. So why don't you come with me? And I said, okay. And I hung up. And I remember thinking, I don't even know what step 2 is. What does he mean I'm struggling with it? And it says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. And I automatically thought that means religion. And for me, I had no problem with religion when I was a kid. There was a lot of dark religion around me. There was a lot of darkness, it seemed, like scary kind of stuff. But my parents, it was a very good thing for them. What I experienced was I could never seem to make this connection that other people seem to make with this God. I would go to church like around Easter, there was great music, I'd get fired up, excited, but I'd walk out and it would stop. I'd be inspired, I'd go outside and I'd go steal some money from my dad and get drunk. I couldn't seem to maintain that connection at all. And I know why today. That's a pretty cool thing. So I told Ick, and I said, we went to that meeting, and I came back, and I started telling him about my problems. I said, Ick, I really like you guys, and this is really cool, but I got problems. And I would tell him about my problems. And I said, I'm sure I have some kind of mental illness they just haven't diagnosed yet. And I love it. He said, Dave, my sponsor suggested I lump all of that under the umbrella of alcoholism. Treat the alcoholism with these steps and see what's left. And I am so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that. So I did. And I told him, Mick, I don't believe it'll work for me, but nothing else has. When I was 35 years old, I look back on my life. I couldn't tell you one thing that I was proud of or satisfied in my whole life. And I said, I'm going to do everything you guys tell me to do for 6 months. And at the end of my life, at the end of 6 months, if my life is not significantly better, I remember saying, I'm going to make a decision. And that decision was going to be to kill myself or move somewhere warmer because I was going to be homeless. And I used to spend a lot of time thinking about where do I want to be. I don't want to be homeless in Pittsburgh. And then I would think Florida, but no, there's too many snakes and bugs there. Maybe I used to look up climates. I always think Tennessee. So Tennessee, that's where I would go. I thought I probably wouldn't have made it past the first bar, And the other thing, Ick said, I was telling him about these problems. He said, Dave, why don't you try this? He said, this was suggested to me. He said, I call it my step 2 experiment. He said, pray about these things. Ask a higher power to help you with these problems. And I remember him saying, ask once. And then go do AA. Do these things we do in AA. And let's just talk over the next days. And one of those problems was I couldn't live in my hometown anymore. I didn't know anybody there. There's no AA. It's a college town. The other one, I couldn't go back to my job because I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't read. I couldn't read until I was 11 months sober. I couldn't get more than 3 lines before I'd just wander off to how screwed up my life was and how screwed I was, and I couldn't stop it. And he said, and I did that. The next morning, I'm in the hospital. I get this call from this guy who's a local guy who used to drink in the bar I worked, and he's 10 months sober. And I said, Chris, how'd you, he said, have you found AA yet? And I said, yeah, and I started crying. And he goes, oh, this is great. He said, here's my phone number. Call me when you're done. I'll pick you up and take you to your first meeting. And I thought, that's crazy. And I told Ick, you're not going to believe this, man. And he said, that's what I'm talking about. And I said, well, this work thing still. So I go to work my first day. The first thing I did was I ran out to the yard because Shorty was out there. And I ran out. I said, Shorty, guess what? And he goes, what, Dave? I said, I'm an alcoholic. And he's an inmate. He goes, I knew that, Dave. And I said, why didn't you tell me? He said, I thought you put me in the hole. And I went to my boss, and she introduced me to this woman. Her name was Carrie. And she said, Carrie's going to be shadowing you for the first 6 months here. She was like some counseling student. And I thought, oh, my God, I can't even read. I can't put sentences together. This woman is going to be following me. And at lunchtime, Carrie calls me in the room there, and she goes, hey, I just want to tell you, I heard where you were. I just want to tell you I'm 9 years sober in AA. So we can talk every day. And I was like, I couldn't wait to call Ick. And I was like, Ick, you're not going to believe this, man. And he said, that's what I'm talking about. And I swear that's what I've done for 20 years now. And I got a sponsor. I asked Ick if he would be my sponsor. And he said, no, I'm 50 miles away. I want you to get somebody close. And I said, how do I get him? He said, pray and go to as many meetings as you can. And I went to a meeting, and I heard this guy, John, and I was scared of him. I was scared of him because he was careful. He was kind. He was thoughtful. He lived. He talked about his wife respectfully and carefully. He was kind. Knew people loved him. But he had a University of Pittsburgh shirt on, so I thought I got to ask him. And that's how I got my first sponsor. And John took me through the steps. We used to walk. He was semi-retired. We used to walk about 3/4 of a mile to a mile each way to a meeting almost every day for about 4 years. And it was amazing, man. I'm very fortunate in that I was attracted to the fellowship right away. I loved hearing your stories. I loved seeing people in AA's faces. I loved hearing these fascinating stories of people coming from really sick, dark places and getting better. Not just not drinking, but getting better and living lives of service and integrity and honesty. And I was pretty content. I was going to a lot of meetings. John had me really active. My main job was picking up cigarette butts. And it was, man, I loved it. I did that for 4 years. Mopping, cleaning. I started baking for meetings for some reason. They used to call me Bacon Dave. And I loved it. And I found those Joe and Charlie tapes. And, those guys really helped me a lot, too. And my sponsor, we went through the first steps, or the steps the first time, this idea of a God thing. And when I was still in the hospital, I told Ick, I don't believe in God. I can't believe in God. I can't seem to believe in God. And he said, you don't have to believe in God. And I said, oh, come on. They used to always say these oversimplified things, and I would think it can't be that simple. And he'd say in our book, it says, if a man believes or is even willing to believe. And he said, are you willing to believe there's a power greater than yourself? And I said, yeah. He said, you're on your way, move on. And I would get to this step 3, and it came time to do this inventory, and I was scared of it. So I told John, he said something about resentments. I said, John, I don't get angry. And what I meant was I've never shot anybody, and I'm typically not a physically violent person, but I'll even today, man, I get a resentment. I'm up at 2 o'clock in the morning just, and I can't let them go. And he said, I want you to list everybody with whom you would be uncomfortable if you were alone in a small, quiet room. And man, it just came then. I couldn't think of anybody I knew that I would be comfortable with in a small, quiet room. You know? And then we came to this fear part. And we were talking about this way. It wasn't that I was holding back. I listed 2 fears: that I would drink again, that I would never solve my financial problems. And I put it down. I could not think of another fear. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, it seems, I remember being at the gym one morning, and I'm on this machine, and I'm looking around, judging every person in the gym. She's a whatever, he's whatever, she's whatever. And then I thought, oh God, I'm getting crazy again. Here I go. And I remember going to 2 meetings that night, and after the second meeting, a guy named Roger Carney said, Dave, he said, how's that 4-step coming? And I said, it's not. He said, do you think there's any connection? I said, no. I said, no. I'm done with the resentment part. And he said, why don't you call your sponsor? And I called John, and I said, John, Roger said to call you about my inventory. He said, how many fears have you gotten? And I said, 2. And I would have a hard time not being sarcastic if somebody told me that. And he just said, Dave, I think you have more than 2 fears. He said, why don't you ask your higher power tonight to make you aware of them so you could become free of them? And that's all I did. I woke up the next morning an hour early for work, which was totally unusual. And I picked up that pen and I started writing. And I started this sobbing, crying. And I listed 38 fears, and I realized everything in my life that I had done and not done was fear. Everything that I called depression, everything that I called anxiety disorder, everything I called attention deficit was fear. And man, it was hard. And I loved, he pointed out that part where we think it should be classed with stealing. And I had a hard time. That's been my nemesis throughout this process is fears. And I really have to be diligent about it. Right now I do a nightly inventory. Every night I do an inventory on my email, and I send it to my sponsor in Pittsburgh. And then he'll send me a reply about 3 nights later, and and I'll call him once a week, and we'll talk about them. And it's been magical to me. I want to share just a little bit before I finish up here. When I was about 3 months sober, there was a guy in AA. His name was Steve, and he was kind of this sarcastic guy. He was a doctor in town. He was kind of a sarcastic guy. And he saw me at this men's meeting, and he goes, "What do you do for a living?" And I got angry, and I thought, like, why would you say that to me? And I was embarrassed to even talk about it. And I told him about my history, and he said, "Yeah, I thought so." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You ever think of going to medical school?" And he walked away. And I went to my sponsor's house, and I said, "John, listen what he did." And I don't remember what John said that time. But about 9 months sober, I was making some amends. And I had to call Steve's wife. His wife was that woman that was working with me, Carrie. And I had to call her about something. And he answered the phone. And I said, "Steve, can I talk to Carrie?" He said, "Yeah, how's that medical school thing going?" And I said, "Steve, why are you doing this to me?" And he said, "Why aren't you doing it?" And I said, "I got over $100,000 in defaulted school loans." He said, "Money's not a criteria for medical school. What's your real reason?" I said, "My past." I said, "I failed out of schools, kicked out of schools." He said, "I was walked off the campus of a medical school. What's your real reason?" I said, "I'm afraid." And he just said, "Now you're talking." And he put the phone down. And I went to my sponsor again, man. I was so frustrated. And I said, "John," I was really mad. And John said, I remember he just kind of stopped and he said, "Dave, let's talk about your dreams." And I said, "John, I don't want to do this, man." And I said, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a doctor. And it was hard for me to even say, because people used to make fun of me for saying that, because they were like, "Oh, yeah," you know. And I remember him just kind of smiling. He said, "This is going to be good." And he had me take classes one at a time, my prerequisites. And then he died. And when he died in 2003, the last thing he said to me was, "My only regret in my life is I'm not going to get to see you graduate from medical school." And in 2006, I had to apply to medical school, and I had to write a personal statement. And I told my sponsor, Mitch, I said, what am I going to write in this personal statement? Like everybody else's, I was volunteering at hospice when I was in kindergarten, valedictorian. And he said, Dave, what's worked for you up to this point? And I said, the truth. He went, there you have it. So my personal statement for medical school started out, my childhood dream of becoming a doctor took a drastic turn when I became dependent on alcohol at the age of 11. And when I went for my interviews, I got called into the director's office for the interviews, and he said, I knocked on his door, and he said, Sir, I'm Dave Rickett. He said, come in, close the door. And I went and sat down. And he came over to me and put out his hands, and he said, I want to thank you for sharing about your alcoholism and recovery. He said, my dad died sober 15 years in AA. I saw what those steps did for him. I'll be pulling for you the whole way. And I couldn't believe it, man. So I ended up going through medical school, and I got to do my residency where Dr. Bob did his at Akron City Hospital. Because of some other decisions and guidance from sponsors, I ended up doing a fellowship in hospice and palliative medicine, and I work with people towards the end of their life, and I'm so amazed. I'm so amazed that I show up for work. I don't think I've missed 2 days. I've missed 2 days of work in 15 years now. Unbelievable to me. And all I've done was AA. I'm sorry I didn't get to talk more about other service. I mean, my schedule right now, I go to a treatment center meeting on Sunday. My home group is Monday. I go to detox on Tuesday. I go to the psychiatric hospital on Wednesday. My home group's on Thursday. I go to the Salvation Army on Friday, and I go to detox on Saturday. And I have time. I used to think, how am I going to have time to go to all these meetings? And what I found is the more I do AA, the more time I have, which is crazy. It's crazy. And I love now 10, 11, and 12. 12 has been magical, but just recently again, like in December, I called my sponsor and I said, Jim, I'm getting that feeling again, man. It's getting dark. I don't like people at work. I don't fit in at work. They're jackasses. They're ignorant. They're rude. They're cocky, whatever. And he said, how's that nightly inventory going? And I said, it's not. And he's had me do a fear inventory now, and I've been doing it, and this feels like a kindergarten kid. But my experiment was, every day I have to go up to a different person in the hospital and introduce myself. And it's been unbelievable. I go up to that feels like something like a kindergarten kid. But there's like one guy, he's a neurosurgeon, in my head I've got he's a jackass, he's arrogant, he probably had a silver spoon, born with a silver. And I went up to him in the hallway, he's kind of walking, I said, Dr. So-and-so, can I talk to you for a minute? He goes, yeah, but I'm in a hurry. And I'm like, oh, shoot. And I said, can I walk with you? I said, I just wanted to talk to you about this patient. And he stopped, and he looked at me, he saw my badge, and he goes, oh, man. He said, I've been looking to see who you were. He said, I want to thank you for helping us so much with that. And all those stories I had in my head about who he was just like vanished. And they've gone. And now I go to work, and I'm comfortable at work. Now, all that stuff, I thought, and it was all fear. And I can't do that on my own. My sponsor said to me, I manage fears like I manage my drinking, But it's so magical to me that when I just do this work, everything else, they promised me 20 years ago, if I just do this work and put this first, everything else is going to fall into place. And the magic part, the hard part is you got to do it to see it. I wanted to see it before I did it. So I'm running a little late here. I want to thank you guys. Wallace, thank you again for letting me come. This is really an honor for me. Thanks. I'll pass.